There are three words I almost always avoid mentioning when I tell people that I write fiction. These three words: young adult romance. For some reason, when I tell people that I write young adult romance, the default response is to act as if I've just loudly proclaimed that my dream career aspiration is Disney princess. Well, why do people respond this way? To some extent, what we read reflects us. It says how we like to fill our time, what holds our attention, how we choose to view the world around us. What we read is a reflection of what we think. In science, refraction is the redirection of light as it passes from one medium to another. The light passes through the glass block, but the direction is warped, altered slightly. I'm going to sound like such an irritating writer for saying this, but isn't this a pretty good metaphor for how literature influences our worldviews? Literature reflects our reality. It encapsulates familiar feelings and experiences, and at the same time, it creates this alternate reality that we can connect to and understand. But just like how light passing through a prism is altered, its direction is changed, this version of reality that is being put forward in fiction is also a bit seen through a lens. It's distorted by the perspective of the author. Young adult author M.T. Anderson said, "Our worldview is already wound into our narratives, whether we're aware of it or not, and we can't help broadcasting it to our readers." But is this necessarily a bad thing? Researchers Rita Manning and Louise Rosenblatt assert that reading fiction helps to enhance empathy through exposing readers to situations they normally wouldn't have been a part of, and helping them to think about how they would respond in these situations. Another study found that reading fiction for adolescents often creates a pattern of behavior to be mimicked, and this is often replicated during times of crisis, so it serves as a form of moral guidance, demonstrating how to behave. So the influence of literature, it can be a good thing. But what about the potential negative influences of literature? If we weren't worried about it, topics such as censorship wouldn't be as pervasive as they are today. This is especially true for the young adult and children's literature sectors. There are always questions going around. For example, do young adult authors have a moral obligation to infuse their stories with some sort of moral value? Do we have to sanitize a teenage experience or try to have a good ending that teaches the reader something positive? Well, let's try this out. Peer pressure is bad. You should love yourself. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Okay, all of you are zoning out, so this is not working. So if I try to infuse some sort of moral value into the stories that I tell, and I do so in a way that is so blatant, none of you are actually going to absorb it. But at the same time, it's inevitable that the stories I choose to tell will inevitably be influenced by my own perspectives and my own decisions of what is right or what is wrong. So when I was querying my novel, Our Last Summer, I sent it off to agents, and this agent got back to me. And she said, "I liked your manuscript. I liked your story, but your characterization was a bit inconsistent. This one character, your main character, has been super astute the whole novel, super on her game, she's great at reading the room, she's super with it at all times, and there's this one scene where she's just so oblivious, like it's unrealistic how dense she's being." But you know how writers are. We're standing here with our little sewing needles, frantically sewing up all of the plot holes before people can discover that they're there. Clearly, I did not do so as gracefully as I could have, because I really needed her to be really done with this one scene for plot reasons, but I wasn't hiding it so well. So what was the suggestion that I got? The agent suggested, "Why don't you make this character drunk?" And I was like, okay, it makes sense. Drunk people do strange things, so this would stick a sticker on my plot hole and it's gone, no one can see it anymore. But I wasn't sure if this is the direction that I wanted to take my novel personally. Because when I reached out to agents, I said, this is a book for 12-year-olds to 16-year-olds. Do I want to be telling this story to a group of 12-year-olds? I wasn't too sure. But obviously, like any other sort of moral dilemma, there is no sense of right or wrong. There is no correct way to act in the situation. But at the end of the day, what I personally thought was the narrative I should be telling, this ended up influencing the narrative that I ended up telling. So what does this mean in the context of your lives? So you're like, okay, Nicola, you've told me your story, this is your book, it's over here, now what? How do I even get refracted? How do I even get influenced by this story? Raise your hand if you get your book recommendations from social media. Okay, so getting book recommendations from social media can be a good thing. There is a lower barrier to entry to becoming a social media creator, so because of this, there are more diverse perspectives being showcased. But at the same time, algorithms tend to promote a small number of reputable, well-established creators, and this leads to an overemphasis on a certain few voices, leading to the loss of organic perspectives, and also leading to this literary echo chamber that is difficult to break into or break out of. Because of this, it has become almost a marketplace of sorts, where social media sometimes often has product placement or has readers promoting stories, and it's always the same few stories, and this leads to the loss of organic perspectives. There's someone who said this in a way far better than I ever can, so I'm just going to quote him on it. Haruki Murakami said in his novel Norwegian Wood that if you only read the books that everyone else is reading, you can only think what everyone else is thinking. Yet in this day and age, more people are trying to curate, control, influence what we're reading than ever before. Much like Twitter and the Gulf of America, books are the next victim of capitalism. We as writers, we are not selling stories. We are selling products. We are selling book talk videos. We are selling books on a shelf. Another personal example I have of this, when you are querying agents, there is this form you fill out, and they have a bunch of questions, and the questions go something like this. It's not, how long have you been writing? It's not, send me your most interesting line. It's always something along the lines of, what tropes are in your novel? In other words, how can we brand and market and package and wrap nicely and stick a bow tie on the story that you're telling in order to sell it to people? Another question is, what are some comparative titles? So what are some books that have similar plot lines or are by authors of similar backgrounds, and they use this in order to gauge the success of your novel and determine how much they will pay you for your marketing budget, for your advance payment, and this is it's kind of the business side of things. Third question I got, what is your target audience? Well, clearly we all know the answer. People not of drinking age is my target audience. And then I got another question. This agent asked me, if your book was a Pinterest board, what aesthetic, metaphysical objects would you save into it? And I was like, huh? I'm sitting here, okay? My English teacher told me, okay, you write novels, you have your plot line, you have your story arc, you have your characters, and then the next second, I'm trying to convince a virtual stranger via email that my life's work contains the exact same vibe as summer rainstorms, post-it note love letters, and the slow but inevitable leakage of time until we all succumb to the abyss. Like, what? I was not selling my story anymore. These were not my characters. I am selling a condensed, idealized fantasy of my novel, a version that is palatable, bland enough to be conventionally appealing. With the rise of social media marketing as a tool for creators to get their art out there, we are less about creating art and more about branding it. Writers are less about writing and more about oversimplifying their complex, multifaceted narratives into oversimplified, one-dimensional, digestible, bite-sized pieces. Quote marketing is becoming the norm, where single lines of dialogue or prose are stripped of their context and used on social media platforms as a hook to attract readers. And this hook is often, it's just out of context, but people will often pick up a book because they see a line that they think is interesting or engaging. Tropes are also being used. So just like how I talked about how I was labeling my book, how I was marketing my book, tropes originally started as a way for readers to categorize books, for them to find what they would be interested in reading, interested in exploring, and using it to help to recommend books to each other within the community. But now publishing houses are reverse engineering this process. We are using tropes as a way to sell books, to popularize books, to kind of decide what books get published before they're even written in order to sell more copies. Well, what are the long-term implications of reverse-engineered market-oriented writing? This is something that I had to reflect about. So if I'm writing books that only reflect the popular opinion, that regurgitate and parrot what is being said, am I really adding something of value to the conversation? If books have the power to refract our reality, am I, as a writer, really using this to create and shape a worldview that I stand for, that I would want to be a part of? We are entrenched in a system where everything is curated for us. Everything is handpicked, personalized by algorithms. It's convenient, yes. But don't you also find it a little bit infantilizing? What if you want to regain agency over the media you consume? This is why we need to look at conscious consumption, where we actively seek out what we would want to explore rather than getting it blindly spoon-fed to us. So how should we do this? First, works in translation. Works in translation are often steeped within their specific cultural context. They serve as introductions into different ways of life, different social attitudes, and because of this, they might shape your worldview in a way that you haven't normally been exposed to. So, if you're only reading books written for English speakers, you're inherently limited by the types of stories, the types of narratives, the social attitudes and values popular with Anglophone audiences. But by reading works in translation, you can, not only will your worldview be refracted, it's being broadened at the same time. You're being exposed to a different range of attitudes. So, personally, for me, I really like slice of life fiction. And the Japanese or Korean equivalent is something called healing fiction. So you're like, okay, healing fiction. What are we healing from exactly? It's also called burnout fiction, so that makes more sense. Healing from burnout, healing fiction. And so what's so different about healing fiction compared to slice of life? First, there is often a slower pace. Nothing happens in the book, but everything also happens in the book. There is often an ensemble cast where you have a lot of characters congregating in the same place, and they're often of varying ages. And for some weird reason, healing fiction almost always has a building on the front cover. If you look behind me, there are just a lot of buildings on the front covers. And you're like, why? So I just stood here and told you that books reflect the context that they were written in. Well, what is this saying about Japan and Korea and Japanese and Korean writers? Well, let's do some inference. Let's take a bit of guesswork. So you have a slower pace. Maybe the work culture in these places it's like a hustle culture. There is a much more fast-paced life. So because of this, readers seek escapism through slower-paced narratives. There is a demand for this type of book so that readers can seek solace from their otherwise very busy lives. Ensemble cast. Maybe people want to connect to strangers. People want to see this physical community really uniting over a common cause or seeing people be there for each other in times of crisis. Buildings on the front cover, well, what is this supposed to say? Well, you can infer whatever you want from this. Maybe Japanese publishing houses are sponsored by real estate agents. Or maybe people just want a physical location to meet up with other people. They want to bring back the communal aspect of to live in a neighborhood. They want to have these third spaces where they can make physical connections. So a lot of this is just bad guesswork by me right now, so don't quote me on anything. But just like this, my worldview has been expanded to some extent because I'm trying to infer through the narratives I've been exposed to what it's like to live in these different realities. The other main way of regaining agency over the media we consume and deciding how much we'll let it refract our worldviews is through bringing back the human connection of consumption. So going back to indie bookshops, going back to grassroots organizations, really trying to engage with media in a way where it's centered around a community. So I really like indie bookshops, but there's one big difference between indie bookshops and going to mainstream book chains. The biggest difference is that if you go to a mainstream book chain, people don't just come up to you and start talking. Whereas if you go to indie bookshops, this is the case. They'll be like, oh, what's your favorite author? What's your favorite book? Oh my gosh, did you read this book? I love that book. Oh my god, do you want an unsolicited book recommendation? And it takes a bit of getting used to. You have to like step back and just be like, yes, I would love that book. No, actually, no, I really would not, but it's okay. But at least you know that these book recommendations are coming from a place of good intention. What I like about it is that it feels so much more organic than getting a book recommendation from an algorithm because you know there is a good intention behind it. So because of this, it turns a solitary activity, reading, into one that is a communal activity, one where people gather over a united interest. And because of this, it helps to really see that there are other people out there who share your interests, and it helps the community to thrive. Brick and mortar bookshops are a keystone of the Singapore literary community. It provides a breeding ground for creativity, for collaboration between readers and writers, and there's a lot more support out there than people realize. So people always have this preconception that Singapore might not have as much support for creative endeavors. Well, I don't think this is the case at all. As someone who is very steeped in the Singapore literary environment, I always go to these book talks, to these free author events, book signings, there's all these panel discussions taking place, and you can see that the community really thrives when it is given the space to thrive. So you can engage with media in a way where it becomes a communal activity, where it becomes a place where you can use this as a connection. You can use this to find people who have similar interests to you, and because of this, your creativity will also increase tenfold. I'm a reader and a writer, so my area of expertise lies in fiction. But whether it's film, whether it's music, theater, visual art, I want you to be intentional over the media you consume, over the media that you let refract your worldview. When you have light passing through a glass prism, the direction is going to work. There's nothing you can do to change it. The light's going to pass through, it's going to change direction, it's going to split into a pretty rainbow. And what then? Well, at least now you are aware of it. You can be conscious that this is happening and take control over it, regain agency over what you choose to consume. I hope that when you leave this auditorium today, you will find a new piece of media that you actively choose for yourself. And I hope this piece of media, it inspires you, it provokes you, and it challenges you. I hope that it not only broadens your worldview, but refracts it for the better. Thank you.